you guys, welcome back to Flickers of Fear, my movie review series. So, HP Lovecraft, who is right here on my necklace. Adaptations of his stuff, I feel like, tend to be kind of all over the place, quality-wise. I feel like the gold standard, probably, I don't think too many people are going to argue with me about this, are probably, Stuart Gordon's Reanimator from 1985, and the follow-up to that, 1986's From Beyond. Also, his Dagon is very good, if you haven't seen that. So, I'm going to say when the writer of both of those movies, Reanimator and From Beyond, who was Dennis Paoli, of course, he actually contributed a screenplay for the 2023 film Suitable Flesh, which is a loose adaptation of the HP Lovecraft story from 1937, which is called The Thing on the Doorstep. So when I heard about that, I knew that I would have to check this movie out first chance I got. And happily for me, Shudder had it in their Best of 2024 collection. So I'm going to say, also adding to my excitement about seeing this was the very stacked cast. You got Heather Graham and in kind of the main role, Barbara Crampton, who I love in everything. Judah Lewis is in this. I remember him from The Babysitter, which is also very good if you haven't seen that. Bruce Davison, Jonathan Sheck. Not really sure how you pronounce his last name. And plus, New School MST3K host Jonah Ray has a small role in this as a hospital orderly. I always forget how tall that motherfucker is. Jesus Christ. So this movie was actually directed by Joe Lynch, who's directed a bunch of movies, Knights of Badassdom being one of them, and Point Blank. The only previous movie of his that I'd seen was the 2017 horror comedy Mayhem that had Stephen Yeun from The Walking Dead in it, and Samara Weaving was in it too, which was actually pretty entertaining. So, I don't know how what most of his work is like, but I did really like Mayhem, so he's the same director as this movie. Now, right up front, I'm going to say I quite dug Suitable Flesh, but I did notice that horror fans' opinions on this movie were very polarized. Very polarized. It was either a love it or hate it kind of thing. I feel like the people that really liked it, like I did, found it a very refreshing, kind of stylized homage to Stuart Gordon's, beloved Lovecraft films from the 80s, with all the kind of delightful camp that implies. While people who didn't like it so much, some of the descriptive words I saw were pointless, dumb, cheesy, boring, and a bunch of people commented on how there were too many cheeseball, awkward sex scenes. So wherever you fall in this debate, that's obviously up to you, but keep in mind, I kind of feel like this movie was probably, pretty obviously not meant to be taken entirely seriously. It's not as over the top and as blackly comedic as Reanimator is, but it's kind of in a similar spirit, in a similar ballpark, I feel. So at the beginning of the movie, we see a psychiatrist named Dr. Daniela Upton, played by Barbara Crampton, who, like I said, I love and everything. She is looking into a body bag, into what is implied, you don't see it till later, to be a set of extremely mutilated human remains in a morgue. And then she goes to a padded cell where she meets with the psychiatric hospital's latest patient, you're led to assume, who is Dr. Elizabeth Derby, played by Heather Graham. She is also a psychiatrist, and she may or may not, she did, have just done something really, really bad. So you can tell that Daniela and Elizabeth are obviously well acquainted, and Daniela seems, very upset, very pained to see her, what you're led to assume is her dear friend and colleague in this state, in a padded cell, obviously. So Elizabeth, though, is insisting she's not crazy and she had a really good reason for doing what she did. And even though the stuff she's saying, definitely sounds bonkers, Daniela agrees because this is her friend. She's like, okay, well, I'm going to listen to your side of the story. So the movie then goes into kind of an extended flashback as we sort of detail the events that led up to this point. So it turns out Elizabeth had a really successful private psychiatric practice and was married to a dude named Eddie. They don't go a huge amount. I guess they go a little bit into their relationship and stuff, but Eddie does seem to be constantly lamenting how much time she spends on her work and maybe, she's not spending enough time with him or whatever. It's just kind of a little side thing. One day, Elizabeth is at her office and she's just seen a patient and that patient has just left. And then this kid shows up. He's not really a kid. I mean, he's like a young man, you know what I mean? And he kind of knocks on her door, and he seems very frantic. And his name is Asa Waight. He's played by Judah Lewis. And he's, very desperately, like, asking her for help. Now, Elizabeth is very reluctant at first. Is like, hey, you can make an appointment and blah, blah, blah. But the more he talks, like, the more she kind of, like, she's like, okay, well, I just want to see what this is all about. So she lets him into the office. So Asa is clearly very, very troubled. And he tells the doctor that his dad, Ephraim, who's played by Bruce Davison, is using his body. Now, Elizabeth, I'm assuming that she takes that to mean, like, the way she reacts, she takes that to mean that Asa is being sexually abused, which is what you would think, right? I mean, with that wording. But as the session goes on, something kind of weird happens. Asa gets a phone call from his dad. Like, he calls a bunch of times and he doesn't answer, like, at first, because he's like, he's calling me, like, I can't answer it, you know what I mean? But then he finally does answer and, like, starts yelling at his dad. But then, after this exchange between them over the phone, Asa appears to have some kind of seizure. Now, following this seizure, he acts like a completely different person. Whereas before, he was very terrified, like I said, very frantic, kind of soft-spoken. Now he's like the total opposite. Now he's like super smug and super arrogant, and he can't seem to remember anything that went on before the phone call. Like, he's just kind of like, oh, you're a doctor, and here I am in a doctor's office. You know what I mean? Now, he actually forcibly grabs Elizabeth by the crotch, so that's nice. And after he does that, he kind of just sleazes out of the office. So Elizabeth is obviously very unsettled by this whole incident. But at the same time, she's also, like, really intrigued. She believes, as, again, you probably would, that Asa might be suffering from maybe, like, the worst case of dissociative identity disorder, what they used to call multiple personality disorder, that she's ever seen. And she's like, man, I'm going to take on this case for free. Maybe she can publish a paper about him or something like that. Now, I'm going to say there are some other, probably less wholesome emotions at work about this too, because later on, like, after Elizabeth is at home and she's having sex with her husband, she fantasizes that she's actually having sex with Asa, which is a little bit weird because he's quite a bit younger than she is. And here, as I mentioned before, just a heads up, there's quite a lot of sex in this. It's not super, super graphic or anything like that, but there is a lot of it. And I feel like some reviews that I read, especially just not like professional reviewers or anything like that, but just kind of like, reviews on Shudder and stuff like that. A lot of the people found it to be sort of akin to some cheeseball, like, Skinamax kind of series, like, maybe. Like, from the 90s, like Silk Stockings or Red Shoe Diaries or something like that. Like, some people said it kind of came across like that. I actually didn't mind that. I kind of see where they're coming from with that, because the vibe of it is very much like that. It did have this kind of like 90s kind of tawdry, veneer to it in that regard. But as I said, I got the impression that the cheesiness was a deliberate attempt to suggest that exact 80s, 90s kind of feel. And I mean, in my opinion, I think that attempt was largely successful. I was kind of like, when I saw some scenes, I'd like, yeah, I see what you're doing there. Because they even had like kind of the softcore porn, like saxophone music and stuff like that. So you could tell that they were kind of making fun of it in a little bit of a way, but not like overtly. So anyway, going against all professional ethics, Elizabeth decides she's going to drop by Asa's house, because he had actually given her his address like earlier, like when he first showed up at the office. And she wants to see if she can get to the bottom of what's going on. Now, once there, she meets Asa's father, who is pretty obviously in very bad health and is also a raging shithead. Basically threatens to stab Elizabeth if she doesn't get the fuck out of his house. So Elizabeth at this point wisely is like, okay, I'm going chill the fuck out. But she notices that old Ephraim has this creepy book on his desk with all kinds of weird symbols and drawings of like scary monsters in it and stuff like that. And I'm like, wonder what book that could be. So later on that night, Asa calls just in a panic and is basically like pleading with Elizabeth, please come back to the house. It's like things are coming to a head or whatever. So she finally is like, okay, it's an emergency. She has to go. And her husband's like, what the fuck? Like, why do you have to? And she's like, hey, it's my job. You know what I mean? So she finds Asa's dad, Ephraim, dying and like attempts to help him, but Asa won't allow it. Basically, he's screaming at her to like, just let him die, like, so it'll all end. So the old man seems to die, and Elizabeth says, okay, well, we need to call the police because he's dead. But just then, Ephraim like suddenly sits back up and starts mumbling some kind of magical sounding incantation thing. And then he dies again, this time for real, maybe. Just like before, Asa has a seizure and then starts acting like a douchebag. But Elizabeth, either overcome by her own lust, which maybe is a thing, or somehow being low-key mind controlled. I'm kind of like of the second opinion, but it could be a little bit of the first thing too. She basically ends up fucking Asa on the desk with his dad's corpse, with Ephraim's corpse, like right there, like a few feet away on the rug. I'm like, kinky. All right. So while they're in the middle of this, Asa mumbles the same incantation in Elizabeth's ear, and she suddenly finds herself basically like looking out of Asa's eyes while Asa is enjoying being inside her body in more ways than one. So yeah, basically just like in the original story, the incantation causes you to be able to like switch bodies with someone. Like you can put your consciousness into someone else's body. Like now the caveat being that the first 2 times you do this are temporary, like you can get back out. But when you switch a 3rd time, it's permanent. Sort of, I think, because I kind of feel like, I'd have to go back and watch it again, but I kind of feel like this rule might be broken or like bent a little bit a few times like as the movie goes on, but they do kind of go into that. Now, Asa, who in reality is not Asa at all, at least not anymore, he's like some kind of, because obviously like he's Ephraim's, like Ephraim put his consciousness into Asa before he died. But whatever was in Ephraim wasn't Ephraim either. It was just some kind of like, he was a person, I think, but he was just like some kind of wanderer, like occultist who's been taking over people's bodies like for centuries. Like he figured out how to do it from the Necronomicon, and he's just been like switching bodies all over the place. So even though the premise of the movie is similar to that of the story, this is, as I mentioned, a fairly loose adaptation. So don't go into it expecting it to follow the original plot like beat for beat. But I'm going to say, that said, this was a really fun take on the Lovecraft story. It's kind of overripe and sort of like exaggerated and wild-eyed and a little bit hyper real. It's kind of has a whole bunch of like smut. It's got kind of smutty sex scenes. Like I said, it's not super graphic, but there is a lot of kind of cheeseball sex scenes in it. And it does have some great gore. I'm going to say like a lot of the special effects are really, really good. And going to give a special mention to the backup camera kill. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. That was fucking great. And I'm going to say like, even though the acting is at times kind of overblown, I think that's done, as I said, deliberately. I think it's kind of all in service to this retro mood that the film is trying to create. It's not trying to be entirely realistic. It's trying to homage, movies from the 80s. I kind of feel like, at least in my opinion, Suitable Flesh did a really good job of somewhat replicating like Stuart Gordon's style without copying it exactly. But as I mentioned, opinions on this seem very, very mixed in the horror community, so I'm not sure everyone's going to like it as much as I did. As I said, it's on Shudder as of this recording, which is late February of 2025. So if it sounds like something that you would dig, then check it out and tell me what you thought. Like I said, it seems like it's going to be like either a love it or hate it, but I actually really, really liked it. So that will do it for this movie review. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, remember like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.